I always knew my family would eventually try to steal my inheritance. I just never imagined my arrogant older brother would hand me the airtight evidence of his own felony on a silver platter. Last Sunday, he kicked open the front door of my late grandfather's historic home in Atlanta and slammed a forged deed right onto the kitchen island. Grinning like he had just hit the lottery, he looked down at me and announced that I had exactly 4 days to pack my bags and get out. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply took a slow sip of my coffee, watched his pretentious wife measure my living room windows with a digital laser tool, and smiled to myself. They truly believed they were evicting me. In reality, they were walking straight into a legal trap they would never be able to escape. That morning started with the kind of peaceful stillness you only find in Atlanta's historic district right before the heavy midday heat sets in. I was sitting at the wide marble island inside the stunning Victorian mansion my grandfather, Elijah, had poured his heart and soul into. The house smelled of dark roast coffee and the fresh lemon oil I had applied to the original hardwood floors the afternoon before. As a certified public accountant, my workweeks were consumed by client meetings, spreadsheets, and tax strategies. These quiet Sunday mornings were my absolute sanctuary. I had my laptop open, checking a few tax updates for my accounting practice, dressed in my favorite sweatpants, and feeling completely at peace inside the home that had sheltered me since I was a little girl. Grandpa Elijah was the only person in our family who ever saw me for who I really was. He saw a granddaughter who worked herself to the bone to build her own career, while everyone else bent over backward to coddle a son who could not even hold down a steady job. That peace shattered in an instant. The heavy oak front door was not just opened, it was shoved inward with brutal force, sending the brass doorknob slamming hard against the entryway wall. Before I could even stand up, they came strutting into my kitchen. Leading the charge was my older brother Jamal, carrying the exact same unearned swagger he had possessed his entire life. Right behind him was our mother, Yvonne, dressed in her Sunday church finest with an expression dripping with pure entitlement. Bringing up the rear was Jamal's wife, Brittany. Brittany was a white woman who had never treated me like a sister-in-law, but rather like the hired help. Today was clearly no exception. She did not even bother looking at me or saying hello. She walked straight past the kitchen, pulled a digital laser measure out of her designer handbag, and immediately pointed a bright red beam at my custom living room windows, muttering under her breath about the fabric width she would need for new velvet drapes. I slowly closed my laptop and kept my face completely blank. I had spent 35 years dealing with this exact dynamic. In our household, Jamal was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the designated scapegoat, expected to sacrifice everything and constantly clean up his endless messes. Jamal did not bother with a greeting either. He walked up to the island, pulled a folded document from his jacket, and slapped it hard onto the marble right next to my coffee cup. In the quiet kitchen, the sound was sharp and loud. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the counter with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "We transferred the deed to my name," he announced with pure arrogance. "You have until Thursday to pack your things and get lost." I looked down at the paper. It was a quitclaim deed, claiming to transfer full ownership of Grandpa Elijah's historic Atlanta property directly to Jamal. As an accountant, I deal with legal filings, asset transfers, and financial records every single day. It took me less than 3 seconds to spot the glaring, undeniable flaws across the page. The formatting was sloppy, clearly pulled from a cheap legal template website. More importantly, the signature at the bottom, supposedly belonging to my late grandfather, was an absolute forgery. It was a decent attempt at mimicking his loops, but the stroke pressure and letter spacing were completely wrong. Not to mention, Grandpa Elijah had passed away several months ago. My hands rested calmly in my lap. I did not touch the paper. I shifted my gaze from the fake document to Jamal's smug face, and then to our mother. Yvonne was standing near the refrigerator, completely unbothered by the fact that her son had just proudly presented a fraudulent document to rob her daughter. In fact, she looked remarkably proud of him. "Do not be dramatic, Chloe," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively before I could even say a word. "Orch, this is how it was always meant to be. Now that your grandfather is gone, Jamal is the head of this family. He has a wife to think about and a family to provide for. You are a single woman. You do not need a house this big. It is time for you to stop being selfish and let your brother step into his rightful place." I took a slow breath and let her words wash over me. Stop being selfish. Orch. That had been her favorite phrase my entire life. When Jamal totaled his car in high school, I was told to be selfless and hand over my savings so he could buy a new one. When I was accepted into a top university, I was told to be selfless and attend a local community college because Jamal needed financial help with his mounting credit card debt. Orch. I had spent a lifetime shrinking myself so Jamal could feel tall, and now they expected me to hand over a property worth nearly $750,000 simply because Jamal felt entitled to it. Across the room, the laser measure let out a sharp beep as Brittany locked in another dimension. Orch. "Honestly, Jamal," Brittany called out without looking back, "we need to rip out these original hardwoods. They look so dated. I want wide plank gray oak installed before we move the furniture in next weekend. Tell her to make sure the place is spotless when she leaves. I do not want to deal with her mess." The sheer audacity unfolding in my kitchen was breathtaking. Orch. My brother had just committed a serious crime, my mother was cheering him on, and his wife was already planning to destroy the historic flooring my grandfather had painstakingly restored by hand. They had invaded my sanctuary, violated my peace, and fully expected me to crumble the way I used to when we were kids. Orch. They expected the quiet, agreeable Chloe who would swallow her anger just to keep the peace. I was not that little girl anymore. I was a 35-year-old professional who understood the law inside and out. More importantly, I knew exactly what kind of legal protection I had in place. Orch. The cultural script my mother was trying to enforce was a heavy burden that so many independent women in our community know all too well. It was the toxic expectation that capable daughters must constantly sacrifice their success for struggling sons. Orch. Yvonne genuinely believed that simply because Jamal managed to get married, he had earned a status that outweighed my years of hard work, my degrees, and my deep bond with the true owner of this home. My mother viewed my independence as a resource to be harvested for Jamal's benefit. I picked up my mug and took another measured sip. The coffee tasted exceptionally good. Orch. Setting the cup down, I folded my hands on the counter and looked Jamal straight in the eye, letting a calm, steady smile spread across my face. "Do you really think I am going to let this happen?" I asked, keeping my voice low and completely even. Jamal scoffed and threw his head back, letting out a loud, mocking laugh. "It is not up to you, Chloe. The paperwork is done. The house is mine. Orch, you have 4 days. Do not make me call the sheriff to drag you out. That would be pretty humiliating for you in front of the neighbors." My mother let out a heavy sigh and walked toward the front door. "Stop making a scene, Chloe. We are going to brunch to celebrate Jamal and Brittany's new home. I suggest you use this time to start packing. We will be back later to check on your progress." Orch. "Come on, Brittany. Let your sister-in-law have her moment with her cardboard boxes." Brittany dropped the laser measure into her designer bag with a sharp click. "See you Thursday, Chloe," she said, finally turning to look at me with a cold, triumphant smirk. "Do not leave a mess." I watched all 3 of them walk out the front door, leaving it wide open behind them. Orch. I heard the roar of Jamal's truck engine starting up and the sound of tires crunching over the gravel driveway as they headed off to celebrate their imaginary victory with avocado toast and mimosas. I waited until the engine sound completely faded down the street. Then I stood up, walked to the front door, and shut it firmly, letting the heavy deadbolt click securely into place. Porch. The house fell quiet again, the calm returning just as quickly as it had been broken. Walking back into the kitchen, I looked down at the forged quitclaim deed Jamal had left behind. He had actually put it in writing. He had personally delivered the conclusive proof of his own illegal scheme straight into my hands. I did not feel fear. I did not feel panic. Porch. What I felt was a cold, sharp sense of anticipation. Grandpa Elijah had warned me this day would come. He knew exactly what Yvonne and Jamal were capable of, which was why he had made sure I was fully protected long before they made their move. Porch. He had seen the simmering greed behind their fake smiles at family dinners, and he had taken every legal precaution to ensure my future could never be touched by their entitlement. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I had saved 6 months ago, right after grandfather's funeral. I dialed and held the phone to my ear. Porch. It rang twice before a deep, professional voice answered. "Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my tone completely composed. "You were entirely right. They took the bait. Jamal just handed me a forged deed and told me I have until Thursday to vacate the property." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by the low, knowing chuckle of my attorney. "Porch. I see," Elias Thorne replied, his voice carrying the confidence of a seasoned attorney who handled multi-million-dollar legal disputes before his morning coffee. "And I assume you did not mention the actual legal ownership status of the property?" "Not a single word," I said, looking around my beautiful kitchen and running my fingers along the marble counter. "Let us prepare the filings." Porch. "They want a moving day on Thursday. We will make sure to give them a legal response they will never forget." Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency I had built into my adult life. As a CPA, the opening hours of my week were strictly dedicated to reviewing client portfolios, auditing financial statements, and finalizing tax filings. Porch. Sitting behind the clean lines of my downtown Atlanta desk, I watched the city wake up through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I have always loved the predictability of numbers. Math does not lie. Math does not hold double standards based on gender or birth order. And math certainly does not expect you to set yourself on fire to keep an entitled brother warm. Porch. I took a sip of black coffee, enjoying the quiet control I had over my environment. At exactly 9:15, my phone buzzed on the desk. Then it buzzed again and again. Within 30 seconds, the device was practically dancing across the glass from a barrage of incoming notifications. I did not even need to look at the screen to know what was happening. Porch. My mother, Yvonne, had officially launched her campaign. I unlocked my phone and opened our massive family group chat. The chat was ironically named Family First, a title that felt completely hollow given the betrayal scrolling across my screen. My mother had taken the lead, putting on a masterclass in digital victimhood. Porch. Her opening message was a massive paragraph detailing how heartbroken she was by my supposed coldness. She informed the entire extended family that Jamal had legally obtained the deed to our late grandfather's house, and that I was spitefully refusing to leave. Porch. She painted a vivid picture of Jamal as a hard-working family man trying to provide a foundation for his wife, while his selfish, ungrateful sister hoarded a home that rightfully belonged to him. It was an impressive piece of fiction that conveniently ignored one crucial detail. Her golden boy had forged a signature on a fake deed. Porch. The replies from relatives flooded in like a chorus of eager enablers. Aunt Valerie, my mother's sister, was the first to chime in. She texted that she was praying for my bitter heart to soften. She actually used the phrase bitter heart. Porch. She went on to claim that a single woman my age had no business taking up space in a large historic home, while a married man needed a foundation to build his legacy. She reminded everyone that the women in our family were supposed to be nurturing and supportive, not greedy and difficult. Porch. Then came cousin Malik, who had borrowed $3,000 from me 2 years ago for a clothing brand that never materialized and conveniently forgot to pay it back. He jumped in to claim that I was jealous of Jamal for finding a partner while I was stubbornly married to my career. Porch. Malik texted that I needed to stop acting like an angry spinster, step aside, and let the real head of the household claim his territory. The notifications kept cascading links down my screen, each message heavier with toxic guilt than the last. They called me bitter and jealous. They accused me of trying to ruin my brother's happiness. Porch. They demanded that I pack my bags immediately and apologize to Jamal and his wife for being uncooperative. Reading through the messages, I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of expectation placed on successful women in families like mine. We are expected to carry everyone else's burdens without complaint. Porch. When we succeed, our achievements are treated like public property for whoever shouts the loudest to claim a piece. Jamal had never worked a consistent 40-hour week in his life. He had never saved money or paid his bills on time. Yet because he was the firstborn son, his desires were treated as sacred rights. Porch. Because I was the independent daughter, my healthy boundaries were treated as an act of war. They genuinely believed that with enough collective shaming, guilt, and moral manipulation, I would break. They expected me to send a tearful apology, beg for their approval, and hand over the keys to a valuable estate just to stay in their good graces. For decades, that tactic had worked. Porch. Growing up, if Jamal broke a window, I was blamed for not watching him. If he failed a class, I was scolded for not tutoring him better. This group chat was simply the modern, digital continuation of the exact same emotional pressure I had endured since childhood. Only now, they were dealing with a woman whose entire professional career was built on tracking liabilities and mitigating risk. Porch. I did not reply with a single word. I did not defend myself. I did not explain that Jamal's deed was a fraudulent document, or that the house was safely held within an irrevocable trust managed by my attorney. I did not tell them that they were currently rallying behind someone who had crossed serious legal lines. Porch. Instead, I leaned back in my quiet office chair, took a deep breath, and began taking screenshots. I captured every single message, every hostile accusation, and every piece of text showing my mother and extended relatives coordinating their pressure campaign. I watched them build a meticulous digital record of their own harassment. Porch. They were voluntarily providing me with written proof of an organized attempt to force me out of a property using a fraudulent document. My trust attorney, Elias Thorne, had told me to stay quiet and let them document their own actions. My family was giving me a masterclass in self-incrimination. The phone buzzed again, this time with a direct message from Jamal. Porch. It was a photo of a moving truck rental confirmation, accompanied by a smug caption. Thursday is coming fast, little sister. Hope you have enough boxes. My mother immediately replied with applause emojis, praising him for taking charge as the head of the house. I took another screenshot and saved it into a secure, encrypted folder on my cloud drive. Porch. With every vibration, I felt a calm, steady sense of satisfaction. They thought my silence meant I was backing down. They took my lack of response as submission, imagining me crying in my office and frantically packing my things. They had no idea that my silence was preparation. I was simply letting them secure their own legal consequences. Porch. I reviewed the screenshots carefully, ensuring I had the timestamps and phone numbers associated with every message. As an accountant, I knew that establishing a clear timeline was critical in any fraud investigation. The fact that my mother was actively coordinating pressure to enforce a fraudulent real estate document made her a direct party to the situation. Porch. By turning the entire family against me, she had tied herself directly to Jamal's failing scheme. I placed my phone face down on the glass desk and silenced the incoming alerts. My relatives could spend all day spinning their narratives and praising Jamal. Their words had no power over me anymore. The little girl who used to cry in her bedroom over her mother's blatant favoritism was gone. Porch. In her place stood a financially sharp, legally protected woman who was about to deliver a reality check they would never recover from. I turned my attention back to my laptop screen, refocusing on the complex tax filings for my clients. The contrast between my productive, lawful career and my family's reckless behavior had never been clearer. I was building real stability, while they were playing house with assets that did not belong to them. The countdown to Thursday was officially ticking, and I was completely prepared for the inevitable fallout. Just as I saved my client files, an alert popped up on my screen, synced from my home security system. Motion detected on the front porch. I checked the time. It was just past noon. My mother and Jamal should have been at work, and the moving truck was not reserved until Thursday. I pulled up the live camera feed and leaned in close to the high-resolution monitor. It seemed the battle in the family chat was not enough for them. The harassment was moving directly to my front porch. I watched the clear footage, fully ready for the next move. The situation was escalating faster than I expected, and I was completely prepared. I leaned back in my leather chair and decided to let them make the first mistake. The video feed was crystal clear. Standing on my historic wraparound porch was Brittany, wearing a pristine white tennis dress and oversized designer sunglasses. Next to her was a woman I did not recognize, carrying a thick binder of fabric samples and a high-end tablet. Brittany was aggressively rattling my front doorknob, her face twisting in frustration when the lock refused to budge. I had changed the locks the very day Grandpa Elijah passed away, fully anticipating that my mother would eventually hand her spare key over to Jamal. Brittany yanked the handle one more time, then threw her hands up in an exaggerated display of annoyance. I turned up the volume on my computer, and Brittany's sharp voice came through the high-definition audio. "I cannot believe she locked us out," Brittany complained to the interior designer. Jamal told her she has to be out by Thursday, but she is being completely hostile. Once she finally clears out, we are going to have to deep clean this entire place. The designer shifted awkwardly on her feet, glancing around the porch. Sitting in my office, watching the screen, a wave of calm clarity washed over me. Brittany was standing on my property, planning to erase my grandfather's legacy, while casually labeling me as hostile. It was the exact same prejudiced playbook she had used against me for years. Whenever I set a firm boundary, I was aggressive. Whenever I refused to pay for Jamal's mistakes, I was uncooperative. Brittany had mastered the art of playing the fragile victim against my independence, and today, she had brought an audience for her performance. I leaned forward, tapped the microphone icon on the security app, and let my voice come through the two-way porch speaker. "Can I help you with something, Brittany?" Brittany jumped back, nearly dropping her designer purse onto the wooden deck. She stared at the doorbell camera in shock, but her surprise quickly turned into blatant anger. "Chloe," she snapped, stepping right up to the lens. "Open this door right now. I have an appointment with my designer, and we need to measure the primary bedroom. Jamal said this house belongs to us now. You have no right to lock me out of my own property." I took a slow breath, keeping my tone perfectly level. "I am not opening the door, Brittany, because you do not own this property. You are currently trespassing. I strongly suggest you and your guests step off my porch immediately, or I will call the police." Her face flushed red. "Do not threaten me, Chloe," she yelled into the camera. "You are always so angry and uncooperative. I am not leaving. In fact, I am calling the police right now to have you removed. My husband gave you an eviction notice, and you are unlawfully occupying our home." I smiled at the monitor. "Go right ahead and call them, Brittany," I said calmly. "In fact, tell them to hurry. I am leaving my office right now, and I will be there in 15 minutes to handle this in person." I cut the audio, grabbed my leather handbag, and walked out of my downtown office. The drive back to my neighborhood took exactly 14 minutes, but it felt like a moment I had spent years preparing for. I navigated Atlanta traffic with an eerie sense of calm. For years, I had watched Brittany manipulate family situations with tears and exaggerated distress. Whenever I asked for basic respect, she would play the frightened victim. She was entirely confident that if she called the police and described an uncooperative homeowner refusing to surrender the property, they would automatically take her side. She was counting on systemic bias to do the dirty work that Jamal was too cowardly to handle himself. As I turned onto my tree-lined street, the flashing blue lights of an Atlanta police cruiser confirmed she had followed through on her threat. The squad car was parked casually at the curb, right behind Brittany's white luxury SUV. I pulled smoothly into the driveway, shifted into park, and took a long, steady breath before stepping out into the midday heat. The scene on the front lawn was completely predictable. Two uniformed officers were standing near the front steps, while Brittany paced back and forth, gesturing dramatically. The interior designer had wisely retreated to the sidewalk, looking thoroughly embarrassed to be caught in the middle of a chaotic family dispute. The moment Brittany saw me, she pointed a manicured finger directly in my direction. "That is her!" she shouted, her voice trembling with practiced fear. "That is who I called about. She is illegally occupying my husband's house and threatened me through the security system. She is completely unreasonable, and I feel completely unsafe." Both officers turned toward me, their postures visibly stiffening. Influenced by Brittany's frantic narrative, their hands rested near their utility belts. As a 35-year-old black woman, I was well aware of how dangerous these situations could become. One wrong move or a raised voice could turn a fabricated claim into a serious incident. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my composure. I smoothed down the front of my tailored business suit, kept my head high, and walked up the driveway with the calm, measured stride of a professional who was in complete control of her surroundings. "Good afternoon." "Officers?" I said, my tone respectful and perfectly composed. "I understand there seems to be some confusion here. My name is Chloe, and this is my property." Brittany scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. "Do not listen to her," she called out, stepping behind the taller officer. "She is lying. My husband, Jamal, owns this house. He gave her an eviction notice on Sunday because she is an unauthorized occupant. She locked us out and refused to let my designer inside. You need to remove her. She is threatening my safety." The older officer raised a hand to quiet Brittany, then looked at me with a skeptical expression. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we received a call about a hostile individual refusing to vacate the premises. Do you have any identification showing you reside at this address?" I held steady eye contact with the officer. I reached slowly into my handbag, making sure every movement was deliberate and visible. "I certainly do, officer," I replied, pulling out a slim leather card holder. I handed him my Georgia driver's license. "You will see that my legal address matches this property exactly. In addition, I have this." I retrieved a folded document from my bag and handed it over. It was the latest municipal water and sanitation bill, printed on official city letterhead, clearly showing my full name and the property address. I had deliberately picked it up from my desk before leaving the office, knowing exactly what kind of documentation would shut down this circus. The officer reviewed my license and the utility bill. I watched his posture relax immediately. The tension in his shoulders disappeared. The moment he realized he was not dealing with a hostile squatter, but with a verified resident simply trying to access her own home. He gave a slight nod and handed the documents back to me. "Thank you, ma'am. Everything appears to be in order on your end." He turned around to face Brittany, who was staring in total disbelief. "Ma'am," he said to Brittany, his tone turning noticeably firm, "this resident has provided state-issued identification and municipal utility records establishing her legal residence here. Do you have any documentation proving you or your husband own this property?" Brittany opened and closed her mouth, unable to produce a coherent sound. She looked around frantically for the designer, who was now pretending to be intensely fascinated by an oak tree on the sidewalk. "I do not have it on me," Brittany stammered, her face turning bright red. "Jamal has the deed. It is at his office, but I am his wife. We are taking possession of the house on Thursday." Porch. The second officer let out a long, weary sigh, clearly realizing they had been pulled away from actual emergencies to referee an entirely baseless family grievance. "Ma'am, you cannot call emergency services to demand someone be removed from their verified legal residence simply because you claim your husband has paperwork elsewhere," the officer said sternly. Porch. "Without a court-ordered writ of possession and certified documentation signed by a judge, you have zero legal authority to step foot on this property." "But she threatened me." Brittany tried again, her voice rising in a desperate attempt to reclaim the victim role. "She was aggressive through the security camera." Porch. "I have the complete audio and video recording from the security system saved to my cloud drive." I interjected smoothly, addressing the officers while completely ignoring Brittany. "The footage will confirm that I merely instructed this individual to stop attempting to force entry into my home and informed her that she was trespassing." Porch. "If you need to file a report for a false emergency call, I am more than happy to provide the full file." The older officer shook his head. "That will not be necessary, ma'am." He turned his full attention to Brittany, pointing firmly toward the street. "You and your associate need to gather your things and leave this property immediately." Porch. "If you return without a valid court order, or if we are called back out here today, you will be cited for trespassing and filing a false police report. Do you understand?" Brittany looked completely shattered. The smug entitlement she had carried into my home on Sunday was completely gone. Porch. She stood frozen on my front lawn, thoroughly humiliated in front of the high-end interior designer she had hired to dismantle my grandfather's legacy. The designer did not even wait for Brittany. She practically jogged to her car, tossed her sample binders into the back seat, and drove away without a single word. Brittany glared at me, her chest heaving with silent fury. Porch. She had played her absolute best card, attempting to use bad faith accusations to force me out of my own home, and the entire effort had collapsed in front of her. Without saying another word, she spun on her heel, marched to her luxury SUV, and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Porch. She reversed out of the driveway with tires screeching, leaving me standing calmly on my property alongside the two officers. "I am sorry for taking up your time today, officers," I said, giving them a polite nod. "Have a good afternoon, ma'am," the older officer replied, touching the brim of his cap before they headed back to their cruiser. Porch. I walked up the porch steps, unlocked the front door, and stepped into the cool, quiet entryway. The familiar stillness wrapped around me, feeling deeper and more satisfying than ever before. Brittany had tried to break through my boundaries, but the only thing she accomplished was proving how legally powerless they truly were. Porch. The foundation of their grand plan was built entirely on pure arrogance and outright lies. I walked into the sunlit kitchen, poured myself a fresh glass of ice water, and smiled down at the beautiful original hardwood floors she had been so desperate to rip out. They were growing reckless, and desperate people always make catastrophic mistakes. Porch. The real trap had not even fully sprung yet, and they were already unraveling in broad daylight. I knew Jamal would hear about this humiliation within minutes. His wounded ego would inevitably force him to retaliate, and that next move would seal his fate for good. I took a slow sip of ice water, completely ready for whatever he tried next. Porch. The afternoon sun stretched across the hardwood floors of my living room, casting long golden shadows. I sat quietly in the stillness of the house, letting the reality of Brittany's total defeat on my front lawn settle in. I understood my brother Jamal better than he understood himself. Porch. In our family dynamic, his ego was a fragile glass house built entirely on unearned privilege and our mother's endless coddling. When Brittany returned to him humiliated and empty-handed, without the keys he had promised her, his bruised pride would demand immediate payback. He could never accept being outsmarted by his sister, especially in front of his wife. He needed to prove he was still the undisputed king of the family, which meant he was about to make a reckless, impulsive move. I did not have to wait long for him to play right into my hands. As a CPA, my personal finances were structured like a fortress. Every dollar was tracked. Every investment was diversified, and every account was heavily monitored. But from my past, I had deliberately left one loose financial thread. It was a basic joint checking account at a local credit union. My mother, Yvonne, had opened it for me 15 years ago when I was a freshman moving into the dorms at Spelman College. She insisted on adding Jamal as an authorized user back then, claiming that as the man of the family, he could help manage my emergency funds if I ever needed support. He had never deposited a single cent into that account. Over the years, I kept it active simply because the long credit history attached to it boosted my overall credit score. I kept around $5,000 in there as a minor emergency cushion, and most of the time, I forgot it even existed. At exactly 3 p.m, my phone buzzed against the Marble Island. It was an automated push notification from the credit union app. The screen lit up with a blunt message, confirming that a $5,000 withdrawal had just been successfully processed. The account balance was wiped down to 0. I stared at the screen, feeling my heart rate settle into a steady, calculated rhythm. Less than a minute later, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a direct text from Jamal. The message read, "Consider this payment for the rent you owe me over the past 6 months for squatting in my house. Thursday is right around the corner." I leaned back against the counter stool and let the absolute absurdity of his actions wash over me. Jamal thought he was teaching me a lesson. He genuinely believed he was putting me in my place, trying to break my spirit by hitting my wallet. In his mind, he had cut off my resources, punished me for disrespecting his authority, and proved to Brittany that he was in total control. He expected me to panic. He expected me to call him in tears, begging for the money back, or frantically apologizing for locking them out. He was relying on that old, toxic family script, where he could take whatever he wanted while I silently absorbed the damage. Jamal was not dealing with a scared college student anymore. He was dealing with a licensed financial professional who specialized in auditing corporate fraud. Jamal had zero understanding of banking law or digital forensics. He did not realize that by using a mobile banking app to execute an unauthorized transfer based on a fraudulent property claim, he had just crossed a massive legal line. I did not feel anger. I did not feel that familiar family betrayal. What I felt was cold, clinical precision. Jamal had just used an interstate electronic banking network to steal $5,000 from my personal funds, explicitly stating in writing that it was rent for a property he had no legal right to. He had firmly established criminal intent, officially committing federal wire fraud and grand larceny. He thought he was playing a harmless family power game, but he had just gift-wrapped his own criminal indictment and handed me the tracking number. My mother had spent a lifetime shielding Jamal from the real-world consequences of his actions. When he stole money from my piggy bank as a kid, she called it borrowing. In my early 20s, when I foolishly co-signed for his car note and he wrecked my credit by missing payments, she told me to forgive him because family protects family. She had taught him that taking from me was his birthright. Federal investigators do not care about a mother's excuses. The justice system does not care about golden children. Financial regulators only care about the digital footprint of stolen funds. I picked up my phone and took a crisp screenshot of his text message. Then I logged into the credit union portal and downloaded the official transaction receipt, which clearly displayed the IP address and exact timestamp of the mobile withdrawal. I exported the files directly into a secure, encrypted cloud folder, adding them to the growing digital dossier I was assembling against him. I was gathering the evidence that would completely dismantle him, and he was handing it to me piece by piece. Standing up from the island, I walked into my home office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across my desk. I booted up my primary workstation and logged into my secure legal portal. This was not the standard software I used for everyday client tax work. This was a deeply encrypted archive where I stored my most sensitive personal assets. I entered my credentials and verified my identity through two-factor authentication on my phone. The secure vault loaded, and I clicked on the primary file labeled The Elijah Trust. Grandpa Elijah was a brilliant man. Growing up in an era where black men had to fight tooth and nail for every single inch of ground they owned, he understood the sacred value of generational wealth. He was also a sharp, uncompromising judge of character. He saw right through Jamal's lazy sense of entitlement and despised the way my mother enabled it. During the final year of his life, as his health began to decline, he called me into his study and laid out his entire financial portfolio. He told me that the moment he was laid to rest, Yvonne and Jamal would try to strip the estate down to the bare walls. He refused to let the legacy he built be squandered on flashy cars and bad investments, so we took action. We retained Elias Thorne, one of the sharpest estate attorneys in Georgia. Under his guidance, we quietly and legally transferred the title of the historic home, the investment portfolios, and the liquid cash accounts into an airtight, irrevocable trust. Grandpa designated me as the sole acting trustee, granting me absolute legal authority over every single asset. By the time my grandfather passed, his personal net worth on paper was effectively zero. Everything belonged to the trust. I scrolled through the digital vault and downloaded the primary trust documents. The pages carried official federal tax identification numbers, state seals, and the verified signatures of 3 independent legal witnesses. These documents were the ultimate defense. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that on the day Jamal claimed Grandpa signed that quitclaim deed, Elijah did not even own the house in his personal capacity. Jamal had forged a signature to transfer a property that a deceased man did not legally hold as an individual. I attached the trust documents to a new encrypted email. I included the screenshot of the forged deed Jamal had left on my counter, the hostile group chat messages, and the banking records showing the $5,000 theft. I addressed the email directly to Elias Thorne and typed out a short, precise message. Jamal has escalated. He just committed wire fraud by draining a joint account and claiming it as rent for the trust property. The digital trail is attached. Please notify the County Financial Crimes Division and update our Thursday plans. This is no longer a civil dispute. He is looking at felony charges. I hit send and watched the progress bar clear, confirming the files were securely delivered. I leaned back in my leather chair, looking at the soft glow of the monitor. The trap was now fully set and locked in place. My brother thought he was a mastermind executing a power play to steal my inheritance and secure his status as the wealthy head of the family. He imagined me sitting in an empty house, crying over stolen money and desperately shoving my belongings into boxes. He had no idea that after spending years auditing corporate fraud, I knew exactly how to construct an inescapable legal perimeter. I closed my laptop and walked out onto the front porch. The evening air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of summer rain. Looking out over the manicured lawn, I felt a deep, unwavering calm. Thursday was only 2 days away. They would bring their moving truck, their arrogance, and our mother cheering them on. I sat down on the wicker swing and took a deep breath. I was going to let them completely indulge in their delusion, because the higher they climbed, the harder they were going to fall. I smiled into the twilight, perfectly content to wait for moving day. Tuesday morning brought a suffocating heat that hung over Atlanta like a heavy, wet blanket pressing against the historic windows of my grandfather's house. Porch. I woke up with complete clarity about my objective for the next 48 hours. I had to play the exact role they desperately needed to see: the defeated, broken sister. The legal groundwork was complete, but it needed one final element to close the loop. Jamal and Yvonne had to feel completely victorious. Porch. When they stepped onto this property Thursday morning, they needed to be totally blinded by their own arrogance. To make sure of that, I gave them an Oscar-worthy performance. I drove to a local hardware store on the edge of town and purchased 40 large cardboard boxes, 5 rolls of heavy-duty packing tape, and a thick black marker. Porch. I hauled everything back to the house and spent the entire afternoon staging a visual illusion. Standing in the center of the living room, I taped the boxes together. The packing tape made a loud, screeching sound that echoed off the plaster walls, a sharp mechanical noise that felt strangely therapeutic. Porch. Every single box was completely empty, but I taped them shut securely, crossing the heavy adhesive over the seams. I carried them out to the wraparound porch, stacking them into prominent, neat towers near the front door. Anyone driving by would immediately see a woman actively preparing to surrender her home. Porch. I deliberately placed several boxes right in front of the wide living room windows, exactly where Brittany had stood with her laser tool, ensuring that if anyone drove by to check on me, they would see the exact scene they were hoping for. As an accountant, I know numbers tell the objective truth, but people are easily manipulated by visuals. Porch. People see what they want to see, especially when it confirms their own biases. Jamal wanted to see me crumble. Yvonne wanted to see me submit. These empty boxes acted as a mirror reflecting their deepest desires. Every time I set an empty box on the porch, I was adding another layer to their legal undoing. I was not packing up my life. I was carefully orchestrating theirs. Porch. I labeled the empty boxes with a black marker, writing phrases like kitchen fragiles and primary bedroom. I wanted the illusion to be flawless down to the smallest detail. Right on cue, Wednesday afternoon arrived with a visit from my mother. Porch. I was sitting on the porch swing with a half-empty box by my feet, pretending to sort through some old textbooks, when her pristine silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Yvonne stepped out wearing a bright floral sundress and oversized sunglasses, radiating the aura of a wealthy matriarch inspecting newly conquered territory. Porch. She walked up the brick pathway with a light, energetic bounce I had not seen since Jamal graduated high school. In her left hand, she carried a large box of heavy-duty black trash bags. She walked up the porch steps and tossed the box directly onto one of my empty cardboard towers. The plastic rattled sharply, cutting through the constant hum of the Georgia cicadas. Porch. I brought these for you, she said, her voice dripping with that toxic, sugary sweetness she only used when she felt entirely superior. You will need them for all the junk you have accumulated in this big house. It is time to clear it all out, Chloe. She leaned against the wooden railing and took off her sunglasses, looking out over the lawn. Porch. You know, this really is for the best, she continued without even looking me in the eye. A house this size is far too much responsibility for a single woman. Property taxes, routine maintenance, heavy yard work. It is overwhelming without a husband to help manage it. A compact apartment downtown is much more suitable for your situation. Porch. You can focus on your little tax business without all this extra domestic strain. I folded my hands in my lap and looked down at the wooden floorboards, letting my shoulders slump forward to project the posture of a woman who had run out of fight. Do you really think so? I asked, keeping my tone soft and appropriately defeated. Porch. Of course I do, she replied, turning to face me with a broad, patronizing smile. Jamal is building a family legacy. He and Brittany need the space to entertain, raise children, and establish roots. A man needs a respectable estate to serve as his foundation in the community. It is just the natural order of things, Chloe. As the firstborn son, Taking over the family home is his right. Porch. Stepping aside gracefully is the right thing to do, rather than forcing us to go through a messy public eviction. The irony in her words was thick enough to choke on. Here she was, lecturing me on lawful evictions and family legacies, while actively aiding a man who had forged a signature to take out fraudulent loans. Porch. She was preaching about the natural order while standing on a porch legally owned by a protected federal trust. My mother viewed my independence as a resource to be harvested for Jamal's benefit. She genuinely believed that because Jamal had married, he had earned a status that erased my years of hard work, my degrees, and my deep connection to the true owner of this home. Porch. I sat there amazed at how easily she could dismiss my entire existence just to inflate his fragile ego. I gave a submissive nod, using every ounce of discipline to feed her delusion. "I just want what is best for the family," I murmured, letting my voice trail off as if swallowing a heavy sigh. Porch. It was the exact phrase she had made me repeat since childhood, whenever I had to surrender my birthday money or give up my bedroom to give Jamal more space. I knew the specific cadence and tone of surrender that made her feel victorious. Yvonne clapped her hands together, a sharp, cheerful sound that grated on my nerves. "Exactly," she beamed, her eyes sparkling with pure satisfaction. "Porch. That is the spirit. See how much easier things are when you cooperate instead of being difficult? Jamal will be so relieved you are finally acting like a supportive sister. Make sure to use those heavy-duty bags for the kitchen cabinets. Brittany wants everything completely sanitized before the movers bring in her custom furniture tomorrow morning." Porch. She reached out and patted my shoulder, an empty, hollow gesture that sent a chill down my spine. Then she turned and practically glided down the steps back to her car. Her mission was complete. She had come to verify my surrender, and I had given her a 5-star performance. Porch. I watched her back out of the driveway and disappear down the street, completely unaware that she had just finalized her own legal exposure. She had tied herself directly to a sinking ship, and she had done it with a smile on her face. After she left, I sat on the porch swing for a long time, staring at the box of trash bags sitting on top of my empty boxes. Porch. Her dismissive attitude was no longer a source of pain. It had become pure tactical focus. A vibration in my pocket broke the silence. It was a text from Elias Thorne, asking if the timeline for Thursday morning was still on schedule. I quickly texted back, confirming that the targets were completely blind to the reality and fully committed to their scheduled arrival. The stage was set. Porch. The bait had been taken completely. I stood up from the swing, stretched, and walked back inside my secure, beautiful home as the Wednesday sun began to set. Warm twilight dipped below the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows over the stacked boxes on my front porch. Standing alone in the center of the living room, I listened to the deep silence of the house. Porch. I walked over to the original brick fireplace, running my fingers lightly along the polished mahogany mantel until they rested on a heavy silver frame. Behind the glass was a photograph of Grandpa Elijah, taken a few months before he passed. He was sitting in his favorite leather armchair, wearing a sharp tailored suit, with his silver hair brushed neatly back. Porch. Even in his final days, his deep-set eyes held a sharp, uncompromising wisdom. He looked like a man who understood exactly how the world worked and refused to apologize for mastering it. I picked up the heavy frame, feeling the cool metal against my palm. Grandpa Elijah understood the brutal reality of building generational wealth from scratch. He had fought for every inch of ground he owned. Porch. He bought this Victorian home, worked 3 jobs to pay off the mortgage, and restored every single floorboard with his own hands. He did not build this sanctuary just to watch it get dismantled by greed and entitlement. He was fiercely protective of his legacy and had an incredible radar for dishonesty. He saw people for who they truly were, which was why he saw right through Jamal. Porch. While my mother treated my older brother like a fragile prince who needed constant rescue, Grandpa Elijah saw a grown man who refused to stand on his own 2 feet. He watched Jamal drift from one failed venture to another, always armed with smooth excuses and an open hand. He watched Yvonne drain her own savings to cover Jamal's missed rent. Most of all, Grandpa saw how they treated me. He saw how I was always expected to make myself smaller so Jamal could appear larger. When I passed my CPA exam, he noticed that Yvonne barely acknowledged it because Jamal demanded all the family's attention. Grandpa Elijah missed nothing. I brought the framed photo over to the kitchen island and set it next to my laptop. Our final meaningful conversation replayed vividly in my mind. It had happened on a cold Tuesday evening 8 months ago. His health had taken a sudden turn, and the doctors told us to prepare for the worst. He called me into his study, telling me to close and lock the heavy double doors. Sitting in his leather chair, breathing heavily but with a mind sharp as broken glass, he gestured for me to sit down and pushed a thick stack of financial documents across the desk. "Chloe," he had said, his voice raspy but carrying absolute authority. "You are the only person in this family who understands the value of an honest dollar. Your mother is completely blind when it comes to your brother, and Jamal is a walking financial disaster. The second I am gone, they will come for everything I built. They will gut this house, sell it off, and burn through the cash on flashy cars and terrible ideas. I refuse to let my life's work be squandered by someone who refuses to grow up." I sat there gripping the armrests, listening to him voice the very fears I had kept buried for years. He knew Yvonne would try to hand the estate to Jamal. He knew Jamal would manipulate her into surrendering the house, the cash, and the investments. Looking me dead in the eye, Grandpa told me he had a plan to stop them, but he needed me to execute it without hesitation. He needed me to stand firm, because our family would not think twice about compromising my future. That night, we began the process of securing his estate. We brought in Elias Thorne, one of the most meticulous trust attorneys in Georgia. Grandpa Elijah did not want a standard last will and testament. He knew a regular will had to go through probate court, where Yvonne and Jamal could challenge it and drain the estate through endless legal fees. He wanted something that completely bypassed probate. He wanted a financial fortress. Under Thorne's guidance, we established an irrevocable federal trust, a highly secure legal entity designed to protect valuable assets. Over the following weeks, Grandpa systematically transferred ownership of everything he owned into the trust. We transferred the deed to the historic Atlanta home, moving the legal owner from his personal name to the trust. We transferred the full balances of his savings accounts, mutual funds, and life insurance policies. The total estate was valued at $720,000, with every cent locked behind a legal firewall. The most critical element was the chain of command. Grandpa Elijah named me as the sole acting trustee. He did not list Yvonne as a beneficiary, and he did not leave Jamal a dime. Legally, he handed the keys to the entire estate directly to me, giving me absolute authority over the property and the funds. Once the transfers were finalized, his personal net worth on paper dropped to zero. When he passed away, he technically owned nothing in his individual name, meaning there was nothing for my mother or brother to claim through traditional probate channels. I remembered the evening the trust documents were finalized. Grandpa was confined to his bed, too weak to walk to his study. Sitting beside him, holding his hand, I watched him review the thick legal binder. He signed the final page with a steady hand, set the pen down, and let out a long sigh of relief. Looking up at me, he squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "They are going to try to take it, Chloe," he warned, his voice a fierce whisper in the quiet bedroom. "They will try to bully you, guilt you, and use family loyalty to make you back down. They will lie and manipulate because that is the only playbook they know. I am trusting you to stand your ground. Let them try. Let them show their true colors. But you do not yield. You protect this legacy and you protect yourself." Looking into his eyes, I made a promise that I fully intended to keep. I assured him I would be ready, and that I would never let them touch a single brick of what he had worked so hard to build. I kissed his forehead and told him he could rest easy. 2 days later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, knowing his life's work was safe in my hands. I blinked, bringing myself back to the present. The kitchen was completely dark now, save for the soft streetlights filtering through the window panes. I reached out and touched the silver edge of the frame. He had predicted their behavior with terrifying accuracy. Jamal had not even waited a full year before forging a deed, and Yvonne had instantly turned the extended family against me. They had walked directly into the exact scenario Grandpa Elijah had anticipated. I picked up the framed photo and carried it to the heavy fireproof safe concealed in the corner of my home office. I was not packing it into a cardboard box. I was securing it against the legal storm about to hit my front lawn. I placed the frame inside the steel safe next to my backup drives and emergency cash, shut the heavy metal door and spun the dial to lock it down. My performance of defeat was nearing its conclusion. I had played the submissive sister to perfection, giving them the exact visual illusion they wanted. They had spent the entire day celebrating their unearned victory, completely unaware of the legal avalanche moving toward them. I walked through the dark, quiet house, checking the locks on the doors and windows. The heavy humidity outside signaled an approaching summer storm, but the real tempest was headed straight for this property. Heading upstairs to my primary bedroom, I lay down on the mattress and looked up at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Thursday, the day of reckoning. The moving truck was booked, and my brother was preparing to march up my driveway to claim his stolen prize. My heart beat with a steady, calm rhythm. Closing my eyes, I let a quiet smile cross my face. I had promised my grandfather I would be ready for this moment, and I was about to deliver on that promise in spectacular fashion. I drifted off into a deep, peaceful sleep, while my family blindly prepared their own downfall. I am not handing you any keys, Jamal, I said, my voice dropping into a steady, dangerous calm, and those boxes on the porch are completely empty. I have not packed a single thing. I am not moving out of this house today, tomorrow, or ever. Jamal's face twisted into pure, aggressive fury. He took a threatening step forward, raising his hand and pointing a finger directly in my face. Listen to me, you crazy woman, he snarled. I have a signed deed. This is my house. You are leaving today, even if I have to physically drag you out by your hair. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply held his furious gaze and waited, knowing exactly who was standing just out of sight behind the heavy doorframe, waiting for my signal. You do not own this house, Jamal, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. You never have. He opened his mouth to shout again and reassert his dominance, but the words never left his throat. I deliberately stepped back and pulled the front door wide open, wiping the arrogant smiles completely off their faces. I stepped back into the spacious foyer, revealing the room behind me. I was not alone. Stepping forward into the morning light right behind me was Elias Thorne, a tall African-American man in his late 50s, dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit. He commanded the room with effortless authority, carrying a thick leather briefcase under his left arm. Flanking him on either side were two fully uniform-clad Fulton County Sheriff deputies, their hands resting comfortably near their duty belts, their expressions as unyielding as solid granite. The visual impact of two armed law enforcement officers and a high-powered attorney standing inside my home hit my family like a physical shockwave. The swagger Jamal had carried up the porch steps vanished instantly. He froze in place, his brand-new sneakers suddenly glued to the welcome mat. Brittany slowly lowered her phone, her mouth hanging wide open as her live video captured the sudden presence of law enforcement. The arrogant commentary she had been narrating seconds earlier died in her throat. Good Lord, Yvonne gasped, clutching the potted houseplant tightly against her chest, as if it could somehow shield her from the reality unfolding before her eyes. They had expected a weeping victim begging for a few more hours to pack. They never imagined walking directly into a fortified legal perimeter. Jamal was the first to break the stunned silence. His fragile ego simply could not process the fact that he had lost complete control of the situation. Puffing his chest out again, he tried to project an authority he did not possess. He stepped across the threshold, reached into his tracksuit pocket, and pulled out the folded quitclaim deed, aggressively thrusting the paper toward the older deputy. "Listen, officer," Jamal snapped, his voice thick with unearned entitlement. "I do not know why my sister called you, but this is a simple civil matter. She is just bitter because our grandfather left this historic home to me. I have the signed deed right here. I am the legal owner, and I served her a proper eviction notice on Sunday. You need to escort her off my property so my wife and I can start moving our furniture inside." The older deputy did not even blink. He made no move to take the paper from Jamal's hand. Remaining completely composed, he simply looked over at Elias Thorne. Attorney Thorne stepped forward, his polished dress shoes clicking crisply against the hardwood floor. Looking at the paper Jamal was waving around, a cold, knowing smile touched the corner of his mouth. Thorne reached out, smoothly took the folded document from my brother's hand, and held it between two fingers as if handling a piece of contaminated trash. He unfolded the paper slowly and deliberately, stretching the suffocating tension on the front porch to its absolute limit. Adjusting his expensive glasses, he looked down at the messy forged signature at the bottom of the page. He let out a low, humorless chuckle, a sound that sent an obvious shudder straight down my mother's spine. Yvonne knew what high-priced corporate attorneys sounded like, and she knew that particular tone meant someone was about to lose everything. "This is a truly fascinating document, Jamal," Attorney Thorne said, his voice deadly calm. "It is fascinating because it claims to transfer title of this estate directly from your late grandfather to you, dated just last month." Jamal smiled smugly, crossing his arms over his chest, completely blind to the trap he was standing in. "That is right," Jamal sneered. "It is a legally binding contract signed by my grandfather before he died. This house belongs to me now. Tell my sister to clear her junk off my porch and get out of my way." Thorne slowly shook his head, popping open the latches of his heavy leather briefcase. "Actually, Jamal, this document is a legal impossibility," Attorney Thorne announced, projecting his voice so every single word echoed clearly down the quiet suburban street. "You see, your grandfather did not own this house last month. In fact, Elijah had not owned this property in his personal name for well over half a year." Absolute silence followed his words. The heavy bass thumping from the rental moving truck parked in the driveway suddenly felt very far away. Brittany took a slow, nervous step backward, her designer sneakers squeaking against the painted porch boards. Yvonne's eyes darted frantically between the lawyer and her golden child, her maternal instincts finally realizing that Jamal had walked them directly into an inescapable disaster. "What are you talking about?" Jamal stammered, his confident posture instantly evaporating. His arms dropped to his sides, and he looked at me with frantic confusion. That was his house. His name is on the county records. I checked them myself before I brought the paperwork over. Thorne pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and held them up for Jamal to see. The pages were stamped with federal tax identification numbers, state seals, and verified witness signatures. "Your grandfather was an exceptionally smart man," Thorne explained with cold precision. "He knew exactly what would happen to his estate after he passed. He anticipated this exact attempt to seize his assets. 6 months before his death, under my direct counsel, he transferred the deed to this historic home, his investment portfolio, and all liquid accounts into an irrevocable federal trust." Thorne stepped closer, looking down at my brother with complete authority. He legally transferred ownership of the entire estate to the trust, removing his individual name from the title entirely. Porch. When he passed away, he owned nothing in his personal name. It was legally impossible for him to sign a quitclaim deed transferring this home to you last month. You forged a deceased man's signature on a legal filing for a property he did not even personally own. Jamal's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Porch. He looked at the trust documents in Thorne's hands, then back at the fake deed. The sheer weight of his catastrophic mistake washed over his face. He had not just crossed a legal line, he had done it in the most careless way possible. He had forged a property transfer on an asset locked securely behind an airtight federal firewall. "You are lying!" Porch. Brittany screamed, her voice hitting a panicked, hysterical pitch. She shoved past Yvonne and grabbed Jamal's arm, her manicured nails digging deep into his white tracksuit. "Jamal, tell them they are lying. Tell them the house is yours. We already hired the excavation contractors. We scheduled the demolition crew for tomorrow morning. You promised me this house, Jamal." Porch. "I am not letting her take it from us." Attorney Thorne completely ignored Brittany, keeping his unwavering focus locked onto my brother. "The sole acting trustee of this revocable trust is your sister, Chloe," Thorne declared, his words carrying finality. "She holds exclusive executive authority over this property. You do not own this house, Jamal. You do not own the grass your truck is parked on. Porch. You do not own the cedar fence you had damaged yesterday. You own absolutely nothing." Yvonne let out a sharp gasp, and the decorative houseplant slipped from her hands. The ceramic pot shattered against the porch floor, spilling dark soil and broken roots all over the welcome mat. "Chloe, please," Yvonne pleaded, her voice trembling with sudden desperation. "Tell him this is a misunderstanding. Porch, tell the officers you invited us here. This is just family confusion. Jamal got his paperwork mixed up. There is no need to involve law enforcement in a simple family matter." I stood motionless, hands resting calmly at my sides. I looked at my mother and saw the raw panic in her eyes. Porch. For 35 years, she had shielded Jamal from every consequence, covering for every bad decision and every stolen dollar. But she could not protect him from this. "I am not doing anything, Ma," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I warned you on Sunday that I would not let this happen. You chose to celebrate his fraud. You chose to stand on my porch and demand my surrender. Porch. Now you can watch him face the consequences." The older deputy finally stepped forward, his hand resting firmly on his duty belt. He looked at Jamal with a stern, uncompromising expression, signaling that my brother had reached the end of the line. "Jamal, you are not standing here today over a simple property dispute," the deputy said, his deep voice cutting through the humid air. Porch. He stepped onto the welcome mat, stepping right past the broken ceramic pot. His presence carried absolute authority. Despite the Georgia heat, the atmosphere on the porch turned freezing cold. Jamal froze. As the deputy locked eyes with him, his arrogance completely deflated. "Aren't you here to evict my sister?" Jamal stammered, his voice breaking into a high pitch that betrayed his rising terror. "Porch. She is trespassing. I gave you the deed. You saw the signature. You need to remove her so my wife and I can move in." The deputy slowly shook his head with deep professional exhaustion. "Mr. Williams," the deputy said, "we did not drive out here to execute a civil eviction. We are acting under the direct authority of the Financial Crimes Division. Porch. We are here investigating the $200,000 home equity line of credit you secured on Monday morning using this exact fraudulent document." Those words hung heavily in the dead silence of the front yard. $200,000. The massive figure echoed against the brick exterior of Grandpa's historic home. As a CPA, I knew exactly how Jamal had pulled it off. Porch. He had taken that sloppy forged deed, walked into a secondary lending institutions, specializing in fast approvals, and leveraged an unencumbered historic property to secure an immediate cash payout. He had used that stolen money to rent moving trucks, hire unpermitted contractors, and fund Brittany's lavish shopping spree. He thought he had unlocked an endless ATM. He never stopped to consider that the second the true property owner reported the discrepancy, bank fraud would trigger an immediate financial crimes investigation. The color drained entirely from Jamal's face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. He stumbled back, his brand new designer sneakers suddenly looking ridiculous against the reality of his impending arrest. That was just a bridge loan, Jamal babbled frantically, raising his hands as in a desperate plea. It was just a temporary advance for renovation costs. The house is mine. I am the oldest son. Grandpa meant for me to have it. I was going to pay the bank back once we got settled. It cannot be fraud if it is my own family's property. Attorney Elias Thorne let out a sharp sigh, shaking his head at the breathtaking ignorance on display. It is absolute fraud, Jamal, Thorne corrected, his voice cutting through the humidity like a scalpel. You cannot borrow against an asset you do not legally own. Presenting forged documents to a financial institution to secure 6 figures in cash escalates this far beyond a family dispute into severe felony territory. You did not just attempt to steal a house, you defrauded an FDIC-insured lender. The reality hit Brittany like a physical blow. Standing behind Jamal, her manicured hand was still clutching her phone, the camera pointing uselessly toward the floorboards. Throughout this entire ordeal, Brittany had operated under the delusion that her privilege and Jamal's unearned confidence would shield them from accountability. She genuinely believed they could push aside a rightful owner and build their designer oasis without repercussions. Now that protective bubble had burst completely, Brittany went stark white. Her eyes darted wildly between the armed deputies, Attorney Thorne, and the shrinking figure of her husband. She was running the numbers with terrifying speed. There was no house. There were no hardwood floors to replace. There was no pool for the backyard. There was only a $200,000 fraudulent loan tied directly to her husband. $200,000, Brittany whispered, her voice shaking violently. Her expensive smartphone slipped from her hand, hitting the wooden porch floor with a sharp crack that shattered the screen into a spiderweb of fractures. She did not even bend down to pick it up. Jamal, what did you do? She screamed, grabbing the sleeve of his tracksuit. You told me the paperwork was clean. You told me your grandfather left you everything. You told me we were wealthy, Jamal. Did you steal money from a bank? Brittany, I can explain, Jamal pleaded, reaching for her shoulders. Let me talk to the officers. My mom will clear this up. She knows the house was meant for me. Ma, tell them. Tell them Grandpa wanted me to have the property. My mother was entirely incapable of helping anyone. The matriarch, who had spent 35 years shielding her golden boy from every consequence, was undergoing a total breakdown. Yvonne had walked up my driveway fully prepared to watch me cry as I was forced out of my home. She had expected to gloat on my porch. Instead, she was standing in the middle of a financial crime scene, watching her son admit to grand larceny in front of law enforcement. Yvonne began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved, her breath catching in her throat in sharp, ragged gasps. She pressed her hands against her cheeks, her eyes wide with terror. No, 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 Yvonne gasped, stumbling backward until her shoulder hit a porch pillar. This is a mistake. Officers, please, you have to understand. Jamal is a good boy. He is a good man. He just got married. He has a future. He was building a legacy. He did not mean to steal anything. He just needed a little help getting started. Chloe, please, do something. Tell them to stop. Tell them he is your brother. I stood motionless, hands at my sides, carrying the unshakable composure of a woman who had planned every single second of this confrontation. I looked at my mother and watched desperation tear through her features. For decades, she had demanded that I clean up Jamal's messes. She had expected me to drain my savings, compromise my credit score, and shrink my entire life just to keep him comfortable. Even now, facing her golden boy's total ruin, her first instinct was still to order me to fix it. She genuinely believed that because we shared blood, I had some obligation to wave a wand and erase a financial fraud investigation. I am not doing anything, Ma, I stated, my voice carrying an absolute calm that cut straight through her frantic pleas. I warned you on Sunday that I would not let this happen. You chose to ignore me. You chose to encourage him. Porch. You stood in my kitchen and told me to step aside so he could take my inheritance. You went into the family group chat and called me bitter for protecting my property. You brought trash bags to pack up my life. You wanted this moving day. Now you get to experience it. The older deputy stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and my brother. Porch. The metallic click of handcuffs unholstering from his duty belt was unmistakable. Mr. Williams, the deputy commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument, place your hands behind your back. You are being placed under arrest for forgery, uttering a forged instrument, and grand larceny. Jamal went rigid. Porch. The arrogance, the unearned confidence, the mocking laugh he had used to intimidate me his entire life. All of it vanished into thin air. He looked like a terrified child, staring at the handcuffs as if they were venomous. He looked back at Yvonne, begging with his eyes for one last miracle save. Yvonne could barely stand. Porch. She slid slowly down the wooden pillar, collapsing onto the porch floor, gasping through heavy, broken sobs. Brittany did not hesitate for a second. The moment the deputy ordered Jamal to put his hands behind his back, her self-preservation instincts completely took over. She released Jamal's tracksuit as if the fabric were on fire. Porch. Scrambling backward, she tripped over the broken ceramic shards of Yvonne's houseplant, nearly tumbling off the porch edge in her desperate rush to put physical distance between herself and her husband. I knew nothing about this, Brittany shrieked, pointing a trembling finger right in Jamal's face. Porch. Her voice carried across the quiet street, drawing the attention of neighbors who were stepping onto their lawns to watch. I thought he inherited the money. I thought this was his house. I did not sign any bank documents. I did not sign that deed. This is entirely on him. He lied to me. I am getting a lawyer. I am calling my father right now. Porch. She was throwing him straight to the wolves without a second thought. The united front they had presented in my kitchen, just 4 days earlier, dissolved the instant she realized the money was an illusion. To save herself from legal fallout, she was ready to testify against him on the spot. I watched the scene unfold with a profound sense of closure. Porch. As an accountant, I had spent my career balancing ledgers, making sure every debit had a corresponding credit. For 35 years, our family ledger had been heavily unbalanced. I paid all the debts while Jamal collected all the rewards. Today, the accounts were finally settling. Jamal had tried to use toxic family dynamics against an airtight legal structure, and he had lost everything. Porch. He had brought a sledgehammer to a fortress. Standing on the porch with my attorney and the unyielding presence of the law beside me, I looked down at the empty cardboard boxes I had stacked. They were no longer a sign of surrender. They were a monument to his complete failure. The trap had not just closed, it had neutralized the threat entirely. Porch. And the best part of the entire operation was that the final, devastating revelation had not even been read yet. I glanced over at Elias Thorne, giving him a slight nod to deliver the final financial reality check. Before Thorne could speak, Brittany bent down and grabbed her cracked phone from the floorboards. Porch. Swiping frantically across the broken screen, she dialed her father and put the call on speaker, holding the device out like a shield. "Dad!" she screamed into the phone. "I need your divorce attorney on the line immediately. Jamal was just arrested for bank fraud. He forged a deed for $200,000 and the police are right here. Porch. I need legal representation right now before they try to name me as an accessory." The absolute coldness of her tone was breathtaking. Jamal stood there with his hands secured behind his back, listening to his wife initiate divorce proceedings in front of 2 deputies, his mother, and the sister he had tried to make homeless. His jaw dropped, his eyes filled with profound shock. Porch. He had spent his entire life being unconditionally protected by the women around him. Now the woman he had chosen to build his legacy with had abandoned him before he was even placed in the back of the cruiser. The sound of Brittany demanding a divorce attorney snapped my mother out of her paralyzed state. Her maternal instinct to protect her golden boy flared back to life. Porch. Yvonne scrambled up from the porch floor, her bright yellow suit covered in potting soil. Her face twisted with pure, unfiltered rage as she lunged toward her daughter-in-law. "You ungrateful, selfish girl!" Yvonne shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a shaking finger at Brittany. "You pushed him into this. You were the one demanding a historic home. Porch. You wanted expensive custom drapes, new hardwood floors, and a huge pool in the backyard. You pushed my son to this point because nothing he provided was ever enough for your shallow lifestyle. You manipulated him into getting that loan." Brittany scoffed, letting out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed across the lawn. "Are you joking, Yvonne?" "Porch," Brittany shouted, stepping right up to my mother and dropping her polite act entirely. "Your son is a broke, lazy fraud. He hasn't held a real job since we got married. He promised me wealth. He promised me an estate. He told me he was the sole heir to a family fortune. I didn't force him to forge signatures. I just expected him to be the provider he claimed to be. Porch, you raised a weak, pathetic liar who couldn't even buy a home without trying to steal it from his sister." The sheer venom between them bounced off the quiet street. Standing on the porch flanked by my attorney and the deputies, I watched their picture-perfect illusion tear itself to pieces. The neighbors were no longer just peeking through their blinds. Porch. The Jenkins family next door had walked all the way down to their mailbox, arms crossed, taking in the spectacle. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson paused her morning dog walk, holding her retriever tight while staring in utter shock at the confrontation unfolding on my lawn. For 35 years, my mother had been obsessed with our family's reputation. Porch. She had policed my behavior, my wardrobe, and my career choices to ensure we always projected the image of upper-middle-class perfection. She demanded that I swallow my struggles so the neighborhood would only see success. Now she was covered in dirt, screaming at her daughter-in-law, while her golden boy was read his rights in broad daylight. Porch. The carefully managed facade had collapsed completely, exposing the rot underneath. Jamal hung his head, staring at the welcome mat. The deputy took his arm with a firm grip, guiding him forward. "Let's go, Mr. Williams," the older deputy said, leading my brother down the porch steps. As Jamal passed the tall stacks of empty cardboard boxes by the front door, he finally looked up at me. Porch. The arrogance was completely gone. The unearned swagger had evaporated. In its place was an empty, terrified realization that he was entirely out of options. The safety net had vanished. I met his gaze without an ounce of sympathy. I offered no comforting words. Porch. I simply let him look at the woman he had tried to ruin, letting it sink in that I was the one who had orchestrated his complete downfall. The deputy walked him down the brick pathway, past the flower beds, toward the squad car parked at the curb. The heavy door opened, and Jamal was guided into the back seat, his white tracksuit stark against the tinted windows. Porch. Brittany did not even look in his direction. Ending the call with her father, she grabbed her purse and pushed past Yvonne without a backward glance. "Do not leave town, ma'am," the younger deputy called out as she unlocked her SUV. "Financial crimes investigators will be contacting you shortly regarding your knowledge of the loan funds." Brittany did not reply. Porch. She threw herself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and started the engine. Shifting into reverse, she tore down the street, desperate to put as much distance as possible between herself and the wreckage of her marriage. She was running. But I knew forensic accountants would review her bank records with clinical precision. Porch. She was not escaping the fallout of that $200,000 loan. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, its blue lights reflecting off the neighboring windows. I watched it disappear around the corner, taking the undisputed king of the family straight to the county jail. My mother was left standing completely alone on the front lawn. The heavy summer humidity seemed to press down on her shoulders. Her golden boy was gone. Her daughter-in-law had abandoned them. The grand scheme to force me out had completely unraveled. Yvonne slowly turned and looked up at me standing beside Elias Thorne on the porch. Her eyes were red, hollow, searching my face for any trace of the compliant daughter she used to command. Chloe, she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the cicadas. You sent your own brother to jail. You let this happen to our family. I stepped forward to the edge of the porch. I did not send him anywhere, Ma, I said with quiet, clinical precision. I simply stepped out of his way and let him face the reality of his own actions. You spent his entire life trying to protect him from gravity, and today, he finally hit the ground. Attorney Thorne stepped up beside me, opening his leather briefcase once more. Adjusting his glasses, he looked down at Yvonne with the detached gaze of a man preparing to deliver a final reality check. He had watched the drama unfold in silence, and now it was time to execute the closing phase of our legal strategy. We are not quite finished here, Mrs. Williams, Elias Thorne said, his deep voice carrying unmistakable weight. Your son's arrest is merely the criminal consequence of his actions. We still need to address the severe civil and financial fallout from the fraudulent loan he took out on Monday morning. Because, unfortunately, Mrs. Williams, Jamal did not secure that $200,000 payout entirely on his own. Yvonne blinked in confusion, wiping away tears with a trembling hand. What do you mean? She asked, her voice cracking. I did not sign that forged deed. I did not go to the bank with him. I was at work on Monday morning. Attorney Thorne adjusted his glasses, his expression devoid of sympathy. He was a professional dealing in the hard currency of legal facts. You are entirely correct, Mrs. Williams, Thorne stated smoothly. You did not sign the forged quitclaim deed, nor did you represent yourself as the owner of this historic estate. However, your son has an abysmal credit score and zero verifiable assets of his own. The secondary lending institution required a qualified guarantor to offset the risk on a fast cash disbursement of that size. They required collateral. Yvonne slowly shook her head, pure horror rising in her eyes. No, she gasped, gripping the wooden porch pillar for support. He told me he just needed a character reference. He said the bank only needed to verify his identity while the inheritance was processing. On Sunday evening, he brought me a single document to sign. He said it was just a formality to help him get established. Thorne let out a low, steady breath. He did not bring you a character reference, Mrs. Williams. He brought you a binding collateral agreement. He had you sign a document that legally pledged your own fully paid-off primary residence as the guarantee for his $200,000 bridge loan. You co-signed on a fraudulent financial instrument. The color completely vanished from my mother's face, leaving her looking frail and defeated. For 35 years, I had watched Yvonne bail Jamal out of every scrape. She paid his overdue parking tickets, covered his overdrafts, and pleaded his case during academic probation. She was so conditioned to sign whatever he put in front of her to clear his path that on Sunday night she had not even bothered to read the legal contract he handed her. Her blind, unwavering favoritism had just signed away her life savings. Because the primary collateral used to secure the loan, the deed to this estate, is completely fraudulent, Thorne continued, his voice carrying the finality of a judge reading a verdict. The lending institution has automatically triggered default recovery protocols. As of 8 o'clock this morning, when we filed the official fraud report with financial crimes, the bank initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings against the secondary collateral. They are moving against your home, Mrs. Williams, to recover the $200,000 your son took. Yvonne let out a sound I had never heard come from a human being before. It was a raw, agonizing wail of total devastation. She slid down the wooden pillar, collapsing entirely onto the porch floorboards. Her yellow suit was ruined, her hair was a mess, and the image of upper-middle-class perfection she had guarded for decades was permanently destroyed. "They cannot take my house," she wept, burying her face in her hands. "I worked my whole life for that home. Porch. I paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. That is all I have left. Chloe, please, tell them they cannot take my house." I stood a few feet away, looking down at the woman who had spent an entire lifetime telling me to make myself smaller so my brother could shine. Just this morning, she had walked onto my property, fully expecting to watch me lose my home. Porch. She had brought trash bags to throw out my personal belongings. She had smiled while Brittany planned to tear up my grandfather's hardwood floors. And now she was sitting in the dirt, begging me to rescue the very house she had gambled away just to finance my eviction. As a CPA, I had spent over a decade analyzing risk, managing assets, and balancing complex ledgers. Porch. I understood exactly how compound interest worked. And I understood how the compounding toxicity of entitlement could completely destroy a family. Yvonne had invested every single ounce of her maternal energy into Jamal. She financed his arrogance, shielded his incompetence, and weaponized the rest of the family against anyone who dared to hold him accountable. Porch. She had placed all her bets on a grown man who never saw her as a mother, but merely as an endless line of credit. "I am not saving you, Ma," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute finality. "You handed him the hammer, and he used it to smash your own windows. On Sunday, you sat in my kitchen and told me to stop being selfish. Porch. You told me it was time to step aside so Jamal could provide for his family. Well, he provided for them. He gave his wife a reason to file for divorce, he gave the authorities an open and shut fraud case, and he handed the deed to your house over to a lender. You gave him everything he ever asked for, and this is what he built with it." Yvonne could not even form a coherent response. Porch. She just sat on the porch floor, rocking back and forth in tears, as the reality of total financial ruin settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She had lost everything. She was going to lose the home she had lived in for 30 years. Porch. She would have to explain to her church friends, her social circle, and the entire neighborhood that her perfect golden boy had signed away her property to fund a fake millionaire lifestyle. The sheer public embarrassment alone would break her completely. I turned my attention away from the scene on the porch and reached into the pocket of my tailored suit jacket. Porch. Pulling out my phone, I unlocked the screen. For the past 4 days, the extended family group chat had been a non-stop echo chamber of toxic harassment. Aunts, uncles, and cousins had spent hours calling me bitter and selfish. They had cheered Jamal on, treating his fraudulent scheme like a heroic conquest. Porch. They had built a massive digital monument to their own bad faith behavior, and it was time to shut it down once and for all. I walked to the edge of the porch, raised my phone, and framed the shot down the street. The cruiser was still idling at the curb, its blue lights flashing against the morning sun. Porch. Through the tinted back window, you could clearly see Jamal slumped over, in his bright white tracksuit, his hands secured behind his back. He looked completely defeated, stripped of every ounce of unearned privilege. I lined up the angle perfectly, making sure the orange moving truck and the police cruiser were both framed in the shot. Porch. I pressed the shutter, capturing the definitive image of Jamal's total collapse. Opening the family group chat, which had been dead silent all morning while everyone waited for a victorious moving day update, I attached the photo of Jamal in the back of the cruiser. I pulled up the keyboard and typed out a short, devastating message. Eviction canceled. Hope you all have a backup plan. I hit send. Porch. Standing on the porch, I watched the delivery notification confirm that the message had landed on the screens of over 30 family members. Within seconds, red receipts started cascading across the bottom. Aunt Valerie read it. Cousin Malik read it. Aunt Susan, Uncle David. Every single one of them opened the message, fully expecting a celebratory selfie of Jamal holding the keys to my home porch. Instead, they were staring at a high-resolution photo of their golden boy in police custody. The group chat fell into absolute deafening silence. Not a single person replied. The typing bubble never appeared again. The endless barrage of notifications that had plagued my phone all week stopped completely. The digital mob that had been eager to tear me down just 24 hours earlier scattered like roaches caught under a spotlight. In real time, they realized they had spent days loudly supporting a man who had just committed serious felonies. They knew I had documented every single message cheering on his fraud, and their own self-preservation instantly silenced them for good. I locked my phone, slipped it back into my pocket, and felt a profound, total sense of relief wash over me. The heavy burden I had carried my entire life, the pressure to endure their disrespect, the constant demand to clean up my brother's failures, vanished completely. I had not just protected my grandfather's legacy. I had completely dismantled the toxic family dynamic that had held me hostage since childhood. Elias Thorne closed his leather briefcase with a crisp, definite click that echoed across the porch, signaling the formal end of the confrontation. The deputies had finished their paperwork and were getting into the patrol car to transport Jamal to the county facility. "We are all set here," Thorne said, giving me a nod of deep professional respect. "I will file an injunction against the lender to ensure the trust property is completely insulated from your mother's foreclosure proceedings. The perimeter is entirely secure." "Thank you, Elias," I replied, offering a calm, genuine smile. "You handled everything perfectly." I turned around and walked back through the front door into the cool, quiet sanctuary of my home, leaving Yvonne on the porch to face the moving truck and the scattered pieces of her own choices. The heavy oak door shut behind me, and the brass deadbolt slid home with a solid, satisfying lock. I was completely safe, free to move forward without ever looking back at the wreckage they created. Elias Thorne kept every word of his promise. The morning after Jamal was taken away, Elias filed a sweeping injunction against the secondary lending institution. He presented the irrevocable trust documents to the bank's legal department, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that their collateral was completely invalid. Once the lender realized they had been defrauded by a man with zero assets, they turned their full legal force toward the only tangible equity left in the equation: my mother's fully paid-off home. Over the following weeks, I methodically packed up the contents of my grandfather's Victorian house. I did not use the heavy-duty trash bags Yvonne had left behind. I hired a professional moving team to carefully handle the antique furniture, the original artwork, and the framed photographs capturing decades of memories with Grandpa Elijah. Selling the house was not an emotional decision. It was a calculated financial move. Grandpa Elijah always taught me never to fall in love with brick and mortar, but to respect the equity it generates. The home had served its purpose. It had been my sanctuary, and it had acted as the ultimate trap. In a booming Atlanta real estate market, it was a high-value asset ready to be leveraged. I listed the property through the trust, and within a week, we had a major bidding war. A wealthy young couple relocating from out of state fell completely in love with the original hardwood floors Brittany had been so desperate to destroy. They offered well over asking price in an all-cash deal. With a steady hand, I signed the closing documents, moving the substantial capital directly into the protected trust accounts. The inheritance was fully liquid, diversified, and completely untouchable. As for my brother, the wheels of justice moved with unrelenting certainty. Jamal thought his status as the golden child would somehow shield him from prosecution, but the legal system does not recognize maternal favoritism as a valid defense. He was indicted on multiple serious felony counts, including wire fraud, grand larceny, and uttering a forged instrument. With zero personal capital to hire a private defense attorney, he was assigned an overburdened public defender who immediately advised him to take a plea deal. Jamal is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional facility, trading his pristine designer tracksuits for standard-issue prison scrubs. His wife fared no better. Brittany had sped away from my house that Thursday morning, convinced she could outrun the fallout of her husband's scheme. Before sunset that same day, she filed for divorce in a desperate attempt to sever her legal ties to a convicted felon. Financial investigators, however, follow the paper trail regardless of family drama. They subpoenaed her financial records and discovered that $30,000 from the fraudulent loan had been immediately routed into her personal accounts to pay off massive credit card balances and fund luxury shopping sprees. Brittany was charged as an accessory after the fact. To keep her out of prison, her wealthy father had to liquidate a massive portion of his retirement portfolio to repay the stolen funds and cover substantial court fines. Now heavily in debt and thoroughly disgraced, she is living in her parents' basement, watching the privileged lifestyle she tried to build on stolen money implode completely. The deepest tragedy of the entire ordeal was the complete financial and social collapse of my mother, Yvonne. The bank showed zero leniency regarding the collateral agreement she had blindly signed for her golden child. The foreclosure process was swift, uncompromising, and entirely public. When the auction sign went up on her front lawn, the image of upper-middle-class perfection she had maintained for 30 years shattered instantly. The neighbors she had spent decades trying to impress watched from their driveways as she was forced to pack her belongings into a cheap rental van. She lost the home she had spent a lifetime paying off, her entire life savings, and her social standing in a single stroke. Yvonne is currently renting a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the city, working long retail shifts just to stay afloat, a stark contrast to the comfortable retirement she once enjoyed. During the first few months after the arrest, she tried relentlessly to reach me. She left dozens of frantic voicemails, alternating between begging for financial support and accusing me of tearing the family apart, claiming I was obligated to rescue her simply because she was my mother. I listened to exactly one voicemail before blocking her number permanently. I had Elias Thorne issue a formal cease and desist letter, legally barring her from attempting to contact me or approaching my place of business. I had spent 35 years draining myself to keep her and Jamal comfortable. My empathy account was permanently closed. I owed her nothing, and I refused to let her drag me back into the toxic dynamic I had finally escaped. 6 months have passed since that explosive Thursday morning on my front porch. Using the capital generated from the sale of Grandpa Elijah's home, I launched my own independent CPA firm. I secured a bright, sunlit office space on the 20th floor of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta. I did not just build a standard accounting practice. I built a firm with a clear, deeply personal mission, helping independent women navigate complex financial landscapes, protect their assets, and build lasting generational wealth. Every day, I sit across from smart, hard-working women who have spent their lives pouring their hard-earned resources into ungrateful family members. I see women who co-signed loans for irresponsible relatives, women who drained their retirement savings to bail out enabling parents, and women who sacrifice their own stability just to keep the peace. I look them in the eye and teach them how to build an unbreakable financial fortress. I help them establish trusts, structure secure business entities, and legally insulate their hard-earned money from entitled relatives. I teach them the power of saying no, the necessity of clear legal boundaries, and the profound freedom that comes from prioritizing their own future. My firm has grown rapidly, fueled by a community of women who have finally stopped carrying everyone else's weight and started building their own empires. Grandpa Elijah's legacies is no longer just a historic house. It has transformed into a living financial movement, empowering a new generation to claim their independence. Porch. Right now I am standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The afternoon sun reflects off the surrounding high-rises, casting a brilliant golden glow over the city streets below. My phone sits quietly on my wide glass desk. No frantic group chat alerts. No demanding texts from my brother. Porch. No manipulative voicemails from my mother. Just the steady, peaceful rhythm of a thriving business and a life fully in order. I reach out and touch the heavy silver frame sitting on the corner of my desk. Behind the glass, Grandpa Elijah sits in his favorite leather armchair, radiating the fierce, uncompromising wisdom I always admired. Porch. When he locked his estate into that trust, he knew exactly what he was doing. He did not just leave me a substantial inheritance. He handed me the exact tools to expose the rot in our family and bring the truth into the light. He gave me the blueprint to end the cycle of manipulation forever. Porch. The golden boy who spent a lifetime taking credit for my sacrifices is sitting in a correctional facility, facing the reality of his own choices. The mother who enabled his destructive entitlement is living with the consequences of her blind favoritism. They tried to break me, take my sanctuary, and cast me aside. Instead, they handed me the keys to my own absolute independence. Porch. I take a slow, deep breath of the cool air, letting a genuine, peaceful smile spread across my face. I realize now that I did not just inherit an estate, I inherited my complete freedom. I left the golden boy to the fate he earned for himself, and with an entire empire secured in my hands, I am moving forward into an untouchable future.